particular picture caused a lot of alarm when it first came out. In fact, it shocked a lot of people. And this is because, once again, Meghan Markle was at a very public royal function. And seemingly this was one that she didn't feel particularly comfortable with. As you can imagine, this was simply because, of course, this was the first time that she'd entered the public fray ever since those bombshell interviews and the exposés and all of that sort of stuff. Now we know Catherine, the Princess of Wales, has actually cited this particular moment as one of the hardest things that she ever had to do. And she was sort of chastised about that, but I could understand that, you know. There you have a family member that clearly you have now zero time for. They've made their feelings very clear, but suddenly on the public stage, there they are playing the martyr. The poor me, the doe eyes, the straight hair, the eyeliner. Work it out, the picture that Meghan was sending out. And as we saw the cars pull up that day in Windsor, it was fascinating, you know, because the body language showed Catherine very strident, very strong. I saw a very different, you know, determined woman who was fighting for everything that the monarchy stood for against two people who clearly had, you know, fallen out beyond all realm. But the story that really garnered a lot of attention was this. What was this mysterious thing, literally, inside Meghan's dress? As ever, let me explain. Everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of By Royal Appointment. And as I often say, I'm so glad that you enjoy, it's goodness, it's windy here at the moment. I'm so glad that you enjoy the longer versions of these events. It gives me a wonderful opportunity to look into things with greater relish, as it were, to say, well, you know, the people that were there, what did you notice, and tell me about that particular incident and stuff. And this incident, as many people know at the Windsor, as it's sort of dubbed the Windsor Walkabout at the time, was pretty grim, wasn't it, when you think, for everybody concerned. Everybody was still so shocked by, as many people found out, the sort of sudden death of our great monarch of 70 years, Queen Elizabeth II. I remember doing a report and couldn't quite believe that I was saying these words, you know, to the people around the world. I don't mean that big-headed, but you know what I mean? I'm thinking, I never thought I'd be saying this. She just seemed sort of to be there forever. Of course, fast forward a few days, and there we have the errant Prince Harry alongside his wife. And as you can see, she looked very, very nervous, to say the least. I think that William and Catherine were incredibly gracious to offer both Harry and Meghan the opportunity to walk with them to view the flowers of people who had left those in memory. It drew gasps, you know, and people at the time thought this might be the infamous olive branch. But I genuinely knew that that wasn't the case. You could sense the feeling, whatever people said. You know, there was no friendship brewing there. William, dutiful. Catherine, dutiful. Meghan and Harry looking like lost souls, hoping that the crowd were going to be on their side. But the bigger picture emerged that what was this lump, as I say, in Meghan's dress? And for years the speculation has gone on that it was a secret recording device and they were going to, you know, record conversations, etc. Now let me explain the law on that. Even if they had recorded conversations, there was no way that they could make them public because they would be breaking the privacy law. You're not allowed to do that. So that wouldn't have worked either way, you understand. But then, a little bit later on, what emerged and what was tried to get out there from the team of Harry and Meghan was, in fact, Meghan was so stressed from this whole situation, she was actually wearing a stress patch inside her dress. Now, you see, this makes sense, right? Because if you remember, a few months later, Meghan suddenly emerged with those stress patches where she visibly pulled her coat back so that you could see it, right? That was the thing. And then the previous story from their team, as ever allegedly, was also the fact that Meghan was so concerned about her security and what might happen when she hit the crowd, because let's be honest, the crowd were never going to now be on her side, given what had happened. Well, she was amazed, even though she had a contretemps with a courtier about the flowers, if you remember. She couldn't quite work out whether to give them, keep them, move them on, all that sort of stuff. But by the by, apparently this was then a security device, a tracker, so that should somebody, get this, try to kidnap Meghan at this particular event, well, somebody somewhere could instantly find out where she was. Now, whether you believe that version of events or not, it's fascinating in itself, right? Suddenly we've got this incredible story about a woman who's, you know, once again, about her, Never mind about the poor lady that's just passed away, dedicated service of 70 years, or indeed the grieving other two that are, of course, William and Catherine. No, no, no. The focus had to be Meghan could be in danger. But the danger that she was in was a danger that many people said she brought on herself. So once again, it's really up to you, chums. Which side of the events do you believe? Was this a stress patch? Was this a security measure? Or indeed, as many people suspect, was this a recording device? And she had been accused of that before, as had Prince Harry. But again, these wild theories are never truly put to the test. Meghan Markle, some people would say, of course, is nothing more than an opportunist. And the darker side of Meghan's personality really came out to the fore upon the very sad occasion that was Prince Philip, His Royal Highness, of course, the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral. A really sad day, and I remember reporting on it on, of course, American television. And I quite liked that. I don't know if you agree, chums, but I quite liked the way that Her Majesty the Queen sent him off, the way that apparently he said he wanted to go, with no fuss, just chuck me in the back of a car and throw me over some kind of wall in the back of Windsor. Of course, she was never going to do that, and gave him the full honours as she rightly should. But what I liked about it, I think, was the fact that it was a fun funeral in many respects. But there was always a darker side, an element to it, because if you remember, you see Meghan, again, could not attend this particular royal event because at the time she was expecting a daughter, Lily, right? And so she couldn't travel because of the extreme time, etc. And so naturally, Prince Harry once again had to face the music alone. And this would have been incredibly a difficult time because, as we saw, everybody, whether you like the royal family or not, it was very difficult not to like Prince Philip. He was one of those rogues that said the wrong thing at the wrong time, but he truly made Queen Elizabeth smile and laugh. You could see inwardly she thought, I can't believe what he's saying, but she's standing there having to take it. But of course, perhaps probably saying what she possibly was internally thinking. You see, behind the scenes, he really did run the British monarchy. He was very powerful and called her a pet name of Cabbage, as long as other things like Lilibet, which we then later found out, of course, that Harry and Meghan had decided to, call their daughter. They claim with the full, blessing of Queen Elizabeth, others not so. If you remember, both Harry and Meghan threatened to sue the BBC about this apparent outrageous slur. It never came to anything because naturally there was no proof. But this has been the ongoing drama and battle of Harry and Meghan. But the biggest problem that caused a lot of heartache to Queen Elizabeth on that particular day, and any day where you're saying goodbye to anybody is very, very difficult, isn't it? Doesn't matter what. Imagine the whole world looking at you on that day. But the bigger problem was this. You see, very, very tastefully, the cameras inside, of course, the chapel were looking at all the wonderful wreaths. And just as the wreath of Harry and Meghan popped up, well, guess what? Journalists received a ping. That's right. We all received a ping, basically detailing exactly their wreath, what was included in their wreath, and their message. Nobody else, now think about this, world leaders, dignitaries, members of parliament, nobody else did this. Now, apparently the reasoning behind this was that Meghan and Harry, and as ever we have to say allegedly, just wanted to be sure that their presence was noted. I think we all noted their presence by the fact that she'd already made a drama about her not coming. And allegedly, Queen Elizabeth said, well, apparently, that's a blessing. We just don't need the drama, as you can imagine. Well, this particular wreath came from Willow Crossley, a very respected florist, and the same florist that was asked to provide the flowers for Meghan and Harry's wedding. Yes, at St. George's Chapel in Windsor. But here's where it gets really interesting, because apparently when this literally blew up as a sort of furor of like, how could they, why would they, etc. Well, according to them, the Queen was more than happy for them to be able to let the world know exactly what they presented as a tribute, all of his favourite flowers and stuff. Now, it's incredible, isn't it, when you think, because of course Meghan's name was on there and apparently she was leading the charge. How would she know what the Duke of Edinburgh's favourite flowers were? Yes, she could have got that from Harry, but consequently, what's it to do with her? She had a handful of, conversations at best. But nonetheless, apparently, according to both Meghan and Harry, Well, the Queen was more than happy with this, so much so that apparently she sent them a thank you note as a very kind gesture for the wreath. Now, I don't know about you chums, but given the fact that this particular story has been around for a long time now, if Meghan had had that letter, surely now in the return to the world of Instagram and everything else that she likes to publicise, including using her 2 children now, monetization on Instagram to help sell the jams, the plots, whatever she's doing, well, wouldn't we have seen that? And also, it's a little bit like the picture with the Queen and her daughter, named after the Queen, Lilibet, Betty, whatever you want to call her. They insist there's a picture together of all of them with Her Majesty the Queen. The palace say there isn't. So who do you believe? And more importantly, do you think that real sort of PR stunt with the wreath was really very, well, unsavoury and more importantly, incredibly crass? One of the greatest mysteries, I think, in the Harry and Meghan story is none other than the mystery children, you know? I mean, it sounds like a thing from a Scooby-Doo plot, doesn't it? What you've got are these 2 children that, until recently, Meghan decided were off limits. You know, she didn't want to have her children paraded on the steps of St Mary's in Paddington like other royal mothers had done. No, that wasn't for her. And of course, that created even more of a, well, shall we say, sinister online plot. People were asking the basic question, why not? Even the late Queen thought this was rather strange. And you can understand that. It wasn't like you were asking them to do anything really untoward, just to share your joy, your happiness with the world. After all, the world, particularly over here, the United Kingdom, pay for you to have that privilege, right? That is the privilege that's given to you in return for little snippets and insights into the royal lives. And what I find nice to see is from time to time, we have these wonderful pictures or insights into the world of the Prince and Princess of Wales, William and Catherine, their children, George. You know, every time I see him, I think, wow, he's got taller, you know, and you do get, because when you cover these things, it seems seconds to you, really, when they were children and then they're growing up. Even Louis, every time you see him, is developing in a different strand. And that's what happens. That is life. But they know that's part and parcel of the job. Particularly, of course, one day we will be under the rule of King George. And that's really his destiny, as will have been pointed out to him already, even at his very early age. But you see, the story that really is fascinating is the fact that now suddenly, as Meghan has things to flog, like jams and pots and all sorts of paraphernalia, even her tutorial on how to get her own makeup, that apparently the spectacle that she called a wedding, well, yes, you can now get that. Right? You see, she's going to detail exactly how you can get that look years down the line. Talk about desperate, right? Now, where this gets fascinating, I find, is the fact that on this particular instance, and I've looked deeply into this for you, the Lily, Betty, whatever you want to call her, right? Well, the bottom line is there was a whole mystery surrounding the pretentiousness of the christening. You see, we were told, were we not, that Harry and Meghan wanted to have Lily christened at St George's, literally in Windsor, like they had previously. And this was a big thing, tradition, even though Meghan said she wasn't too fussed about tradition. Contradictory in every single level. But what they really wanted and needed at that point was fresh material, you know, new pictures with the Queen, all of that sort of stuff. Everything really worked in their favour. Meghan is an opportunist. We all know that. She's a micro celebrity and wants to make sure that she gets the right stuff to be able to plug the right product further down the line. And this is truly then what happened. What's fascinating here, you see, is her sort of plot, her plan, along really with Harry, was blown out the bag when they did that documentary. You see, if you remember, they sort of pointed out that during that they really wanted to have members of their family around them, but nobody could seemingly make a decision. And the decision really all lay with, at that time, the Queen. That wasn't the case at all. You see, they couldn't make a decision about when they wanted to do it, and diaries have to be planned out. People are busy, charitable events, tours, all that sort of stuff. It's not like you can just say, I'll do it Wednesday and I'll pop up. So what happened was this very pared down christening, which happened in California. And then what we were told was the fact that apparently, yes, get this, that of course, the royals were invited, but nobody attended. Well, what I can tell you is that they were given very, very slight notice. And there are other things to look into in that as well. The fact that you have to think about security, who else will be there, what pictures are being taken. It's logistics are incredible. And what you're asking somebody at that age to fly across the world, as in the Queen, to attend the christening, even though it could have easily been sorted out over this end if you'd only shown some courtesy. But you see, what really happened was, according to a well-placed source, and as ever we have to say allegedly, was Tyler Perry, their chum, became, of course, the godfather, right? And what was fascinating was he let the cat out of the bag, because he said he was delighted, thrilled, honoured, couldn't believe it when they asked him once again to become the godfather. Now, this is a man that nobody really knew, until this point, other than the celebrity circles that he worked in. More importantly, neither did Harry and Meghan. He reached out to them to offer his place as a place of sanctuary. Some people might say that's very generous of him. Others might suggest, of course, opportunistic. I couldn't possibly comment. But where this gets even more interesting is the line that he threw away, and many people haven't picked up on, is he would only agree to this if he didn't have to go over there and do all the dressy up business. Now, this is proving difficult, you see, because at this point, when somebody's giving you so much, as in what he'd done, well then, yeah, you're trapped, whichever way you look at it. And this person held the power for that particular point. And so consequently, even though they may have wanted to, try and push it over here for St. George's Chapel and get something going on that level, well, clearly the money talked even then. And I'm sure he was delighted and thrilled that he didn't have to go along with playing dressy up alongside the rest of them. But consequently, what a terrible shame that this particular young lady, when she grows older, will realise that, well, quite frankly, whichever way you look at it, money clearly talked. Wouldn't she have much preferred to be part of her own heritage, the family line that clearly she knows nothing about now? Either way, things are looking, shall we say, tricky, as we find out more and more about this mysterious family and those two children. Anybody else agree? It was said that the Queen Mother, the Queen Elizabeth, I only really know her, as many people do, as the Queen Mother. It's what the generation that we grow up with, isn't it? And I was lucky enough to briefly meet her, and a very formidable woman, behind that very sweet smile, you could understand that there was a very powerful presence. This, of course, was a woman that lived through the abdication and had to kind of resurrect the monarchy. There's no two ways about it. The way that she dealt with it was very difficult. As you can understand, she suddenly became closer to Queen Mary, even though Queen Mary was less than, nice to her at the beginning of the marriage. People forget these things, This is history, this is how it comes around, and this is how it's overridden. You see, pointedly, at that then, given moment, Queen Mary must have known, in the passage of time, Queen Elizabeth was going to become one of the most powerful women in the world. And this really didn't go unnoticed, of course, to the former royals known as Edward and Mrs. Simpson. You see, as I've said to you before, Wallis Simpson, in my opinion, wasn't too bothered about really the fame or the glory that came with that particular position. The story goes, as many people realise, that, was she really actually in love with Edward? Was it a sort of romance that would have been very opportunistic for her to go and see things, be at various events? Really, I suppose, emulating, as some people suggested, the mistresses of Edward VII. If you look at like Lily Langtry, for instance, there she was, had a towering career in the world of theatre, was able to have endorsements with things like Pear soap, but with none of the formalities, none of the commitment. You see how history does repeat itself in many ways, chums, right? Now, this particular headline caught my eye, and it's fascinating because talking to people who are still around who worked with the Queen Mother, she was indeed a very powerful woman, so much so that according to that period, the Führer, that is Adolf Hitler, basically said she is the most powerful woman in Europe. But where did that come from? Now, apparently, this may surprise you because actually, what happened was it wasn't a throwaway remark. As you may remember, this now very infamous picture of David and Wallis meeting the Führer at that time literally went around the world. And as one can imagine, shockwaves through all the sort of levels of aristocrats and the hierarchy, the royal family. It really was a sort of message, one might say replications of exactly what Harry and Meghan are doing themselves, shocking people, if you like, into thinking, take notice of us, you will take notice of us, that sort of thing. And that really was the battleground that was drawn at that point. They didn't want to be pushed aside, and they certainly did want the full glory. Now, the Queen Mother, Queen Elizabeth, was very, very canny indeed, because yes, she was very powerful, so much so that she could bend the ear of course, the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, and really control the royals right down to her husband, King George. We all know the story of the King's speech. Well, King George wasn't the most, shall we say, how can I put this nicely? He wasn't a confident person. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? But when you think about that now, and you think about Queen Elizabeth, she was a lovely lady, Queen Elizabeth, but I believe that she was lacking in a lot of personal self-confidence, hence the reason she loved the fact that Philip was this powerful frontman for her. It makes sense when you think he was behind her, but essentially he was in front of her. Now, what really turned around for the Queen Mother was, of course, the infamous bombing of Buckingham Palace. And then, as she famously said, she can now look the East End in the face and eyes because a similar thing had happened to her. Of course, the princesses were out at Windsor Castle, but she was absolutely furious and never really forgot that infamous picture. And also, you see, the story goes behind the scenes that she leaked quite a lot of, Wallis and David should have pointed out, she leaked quite a lot of info to that meeting at that point, seemingly about why they were booted out of the monarchy, etc. And as many people realise, the story goes that if he'd have gained power and got into power at whatever level, then he was going to reinstate them on their rightly thrones. And they apparently truly believed it. You see, while Wallis wasn't bothered about the royal protocol and all the things that went with it, she did quite like the idea, of course, of being a queen. I mean, you can understand that. It certainly has its moments, doesn't it? But you see, obviously, the Queen Mother was very savvy indeed. And when, of course, eventually things had, shall we say, mellowed, they certainly never mellowed for the Queen Mother. She couldn't forgive, forget, or indeed really move on from the fact of just exactly not what Wallis had done, but in fact the former king. She realised that actually he had put a great strain on his brother by becoming king. You see, I mean, we all know the problems that he had with smoking, with his personal sort of confidence. Everything really reverberated around that. And while people say she was the most powerful woman in Europe, she certainly was. She did her very best to make sure that Britain put on a united front and made sure, of course, that the world realised that she was a force to be reckoned with. And that's truly the reason behind the scenes why she couldn't stand even to be in the presence or have Wallis's name even mentioned, even in the latter parts of her life. Everybody knows that Harry and Meghan are incredibly litigious, and we've seen this time and time again. If you remember, of course, way back when South Park put out that infamous, worldwide privacy tour, they were absolutely furious, and some people might say rightly so. But as I pointed out, they wanted to get litigious with the makers of South Park, but really there was no legal recourse to be had. This is because they were never really mentioned by name, and although the costumes and the story and the everything was virtually the same, legally they had not a leg to stand on. Yes, they could say the imagery was the same, but it proved too difficult. Very quickly, of course, what followed was Family Guy. And Family Guy was another one, really, sort of making an absolute marshmallow of this couple that thought that people should take them rather seriously. I always remember the footage, I don't know if you do, chums, where Meghan and Harry went to New York for the first time, not the catastrophic car chase one, but the first time. And she came out with her hair scraped back, all in black, very regal, and just casually waved to the media as if, I'm way too busy to talk to you. And that really was a point where she thought the respect should have been forthcoming. But of course, what Meghan has literally hidden from and literally ridden from also are the problems that her previous life have afforded her. You see, as we all know, she points out that she was a kid, according to her, that lived on Jack-in-a-Box food, which apparently is a fast food chain in America. I'd never heard of it, even though I've been to America a number of times, but apparently this was the thing that she lived on. Of course, she previously said, yet again, some people might suggest another lie, that she had farm-to-table food. And then her father has come out and said that she lived incredibly well at all some of the very best restaurants that he was able to afford, making sure that he coddled his daughter into a life that now she's become very much accustomed to. But there are certain things that, while she wants to get legal on, the mystery surrounds the ones that she doesn't. And this really is one of those stories because, as I said, it costs a lot of money, even from Harry and Meghan's vast wealth, to undertake legal recourse, particularly when you're taking on major companies, huge companies that have, very, very deep pockets. And this particular company, the National Enquirer, put out this front cover. Remember this? And this literally was an incredible shock because, as you can see from the headline, it's incredibly detailed and gives away quite a lot of information. And what was fascinating about this was originally people thought that this would, just simply simper away. And as Harry and Meghan have said before on numerous occasions, baseless rumours, fictitious stories, etc. Now, what was fascinating was when I contacted the National Enquirer and said, where did this story go? They're more than happy to tell you 100% that they never received any legal recourse from Harry and Meghan, or indeed their current legal teams working for them at that time. Now, when you think, place this story that's on America's newsstands, and let's not forget also that Meghan claimed in the Oprah Winfrey interview that tabloids were a sort of a mystery to her because they didn't have them over where she lived. Clearly forgetting, of course, that there's Us Weekly, People magazine, and then, of course, the fun favourites like Star magazine, the National Enquirer. It's a strange thing. I've known the National Enquirer even over here in the United Kingdom for many years. When I worked in the record industry, they would come out with the most outlandish stories about pop stars that I was literally working with. And you think, where did that come from? But, people who read it know it's a bit of fun. That's what I remember. The thing I remember also about the National Enquirer is they had the beautiful Arlene Dahl, do you remember her, as their astrologer? Yeah, a strange combination, but a girl's got to make some money, right? But back to this. So what happened? Well, apparently they just hoped it would go away because it was a baseless story, as they said, and seemingly nobody showed any interest in it. But according to a well-placed source, even Prince Harry was very irked by this and wanted to know more, as ever we have to say allegedly. But the bottom line was, once again, it was battered away as this is just complete fabrication. Now, up until this point in time, nobody's ever followed this story through. And one might suggest there might be some legal tightenings there. But isn't it odd when you look at this particular story and you think to yourself, they went on a national newsstand around the world with quite detailed content inside, and yet nobody seemingly has followed through, even though, according to sources, well, at that time, they just thought it would go away. It has. But amazingly, this story is now picking up traction once again. Should Meghan and Harry now be worried? Thank you as ever for watching this week's By Royal Appointment. I'm so glad that you've enjoyed it. And if you can, very kindly, chums, please like and share. As you know, I film this throughout various locations up and down the country, and I like to share what I find out with you on a longer form basis. If you have enjoyed it, as I said, if you could like it, tell the chums about it, send it around so that obviously it'd be nice to make more. It's lovely to put the effort in and, more importantly, share the stories that have a deeper meaning to all of us who want to know the inside track. So until next time, by royal appointment, I'll see you soon.